Hi there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Nicole with morningchores.com. Today is the second video in our preparedness series. Today we will be discussing water, food, and shelter. If you missed the previous video, I highly recommend that you go back and watch that first. There's a link in the description box below, but I basically give an overview of preparedness, why we would want to prepare, what are we preparing for, and then I also share an overview of my top 10 category list. The first rule is 3 days. Now, I mentioned in our introduction video that prepping can be very overwhelming, and if you're new to it, I highly recommend that you just start with 3 days. Get enough supplies on hand to get you through for 3 days. 3 days of not being able to go to the store, 3 days without power, 3 days of an illness. This is something that's achievable and easy, and it's a good place to start. So it's kind of what I'm gonna go off of today. My next rule is to prep in threes. So you see there's a trend here with the number 3. But for each category that we discuss in the series, I want you to keep in mind that it's important to have 3 different ways of achieving that goal. So I'll go into more detail here in a minute, but for example, with water, you want to have 3 different ways to acquire clean water. And my last rule is only stock up on things that you're actually going to use. And this applies more to the food, but I really think it can be applied to any category. It's very easy to just accumulate, gather, buy stuff, thinking that you might use it someday or you might eat it someday, and then you never do. So I think it will save you a lot of money and a lot of extra space in your home in the long run if you only stock up on things that you're actually going to use, things that you already are using. So that way it gets used up and it doesn't go to waste. The first category we're going to discuss today is water. This is the category I feel like everybody's mind goes to when we think of emergency, prepping, situations where you might be stranded or stuck. We think of water, and it's natural to think that because you can only go about 3 days, maybe a day or 2 more without water. So the first thing we need to answer is how much water does one person need per day? The experts recommend 1 gallon per person per day. So if we are prepping for 3 days, I have a family of 4, I need a minimum of 12 gallons of water in storage for my 3-day emergency prep. Now, mind you, this is drinking water only. This does not include water that you're using to wash dishes or wash clothes or to keep yourself clean or for cooking. This is exclusively drinking water. So you technically need more water than a gallon per day, but that is the minimum. So you can always start there and then build from there. So how are 3 different ways I'm going to achieve this goal of acquiring enough water for 3 days? Because remember my 3s, you want 3 different ways of achieving the goal. Number 1, and probably the most easiest, is water storage. So taking old plastic containers like orange juice containers or glass jars, filling them up with water, tightening the lid on top, and storing them in a safe place. Preferably, you'd want to store this indoors or somewhere where the temperature is more controlled. You wouldn't necessarily want to store this in a garage where the temperature is going from hot to cold. I mean, if that's your only space, it's better than nothing. But store this in a basement, a closet. This is the first and most easy step for water storage, is literally just filling up jars and jugs and sticking them somewhere in your home. Second option is rain catchment. You can catch rain from the sky. Just know that you need some way to filter that water. So you're gonna need a couple extra supplies to make sure that the water is clean and safe, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Your third option is your city or well water. If you live in the city and the power goes out, more than likely you will still have running water, and that's something you can depend on. But I know if I lived in the city, I'd probably want a 4th option for obtaining clean, safe water to drink, because you never know, you may not have running water. Now, I live in the country, so I'm on well water, so if the power goes out, we have no running water. So what we did is we installed a manual hand pump on our wellhead outside, so if the power goes out, we can still manage to get drinking water from our well. Now, we also have some other things in place, like a generator, so we could have running water in the house if we absolutely needed to. You can also consider looking into solar as well. That's another option. So just keep in mind that there's all kinds of options for lots of different situations. As I mentioned earlier with the rain catchment system, you need a way to purify your water and make it safe for drinking. course, you can always boil your water, but sometimes that's not enough and you need to go a little bit further. Also, you may not have a way to boil water. So you need to think about, what could I have on hand to make that water safe for drinking? There's things that are very simple, like tablets that you throw in the water and you let it sit for a period of time. You can also buy something called a life straw, which is something hikers use a lot. In our home on a regular basis, we use a Santivia system, and it filters a large amount of water at one time, which is nice to have for inside the home. Another thing that we keep on hand, we keep this in our vehicle. It's a Sawyer 1 gallon gravity system. This is something I keep in the car at all times, and I just have it on hand just in case. I've never needed it, thankfully, but it's nice that it's there. So finding some of those options and keeping them on hand so that you can have safe drinking water is really important. Our next category is food, and I feel like I could do a whole series on food storage, and we do have some older videos on how to get started with food storage or long-term food storage, and I may redo those videos just to freshen them up a little bit. But again, we want to stick to our rule of 3 days. Now you might be thinking, how much food do I need to store for, let's say, a family of 4 for 3 days? That could be really overwhelming, because now we got to start thinking about calories, protein, fats, and all those things. Well, there's a website called easyprepping.com who have taken all the guesswork out for you. Right on the front of their website, they have a calculator. You just click on that and you can put in all the information of how many people are in your family, their ages, and how many days you want to have food storage for. So this is a really great tool because it breaks down how many grains you need, how much meat, dairy, everything, and it's based on everyone's age, which is really nice, and you can print it out so that you have a copy of it on hand, and this will help you get organized. So I highly recommend checking that website out. They also have a water storage calculator as well, which is really handy. So I like this website because, again, they've done all the work for you, so you can just use this tool to make it so much more simpler. Another thing you want to keep in mind with food storage is that you want to store shelf-stable food, because in the event that the power goes out and let's say you don't have a generator or solar or any means to get power to run your fridge or your freezer, you're going to need food that can just sit on the shelf. So canned goods, dried goods, freeze-dried food, all of these types of foods are shelf stable and ready to go. Another thing that you want to keep in mind with food storage is you want to store food that can be eaten straight away. There's no preparation or cooking, because you never know, you might be in a situation where you can't cook and you just need to eat the food. So having canned goods like canned soups are really handy because you can just eat them straight from the can. But if you do have the opportunity to prepare a meal, you could make some instant mashed potatoes, which is another shelf-stable food, and you could pour that soup on top, and now you have this hearty meal with all this meat and veggies and the mashed potatoes, and that's actually a meal that would taste really good, especially if you haven't had power for a day or two. Having that like nice warm meal and the comfort food of mashed potatoes and chicken, and you got kind of this gravy thing going on with the soup, it really will hit the spot. And the last guideline I have is only store food that your family actually eats. I mentioned this earlier before, and I think this is very important, especially with food. There's been many times where I've purchased something to put in my food storage that I thought would be good because it's high in fiber or it's high in protein, and we end up never eating it because nobody likes it, and then it ends up getting thrown away. So that was really wasteful, money-wise and time-wise. So to avoid that, just stock up foods that your family actually likes. And the last category I'd like to go over today is shelter. And I feel like this one's an obvious because most of us have homes that we live in. We have apartments, condo, maybe you live in a tent or a camper, whatever it is. Most of us have a roof over our heads. So we don't really have to give this much thought, but I do think we still need to apply our rule of having 3 different ways of acquiring the same thing. So having a tent on hand is really handy. You never know when you might need a tent, and even if you never use it for emergency situations, every summer we set up our tent in the backyard and camp out in it, and it's this fun summertime experience for our kids. So it's something we're actually using, we're actually doing, and it is important to know how to set up your tent before you actually need it, so it gives us good practice to do that. Another thing you can do is have a tarp and rope on hand. Do you know how to do that? Can you build a shelter with just a tarp and a rope? Another fun activity that we're gonna do with the kids this summer sometime is go in the woods and have a competition on building a structure with only using what's in the woods. So we're not allowed to use ropes or tarps or anything. We have to just strictly use what's in the woods. So again, it's a fun family activity, but we're also building skills at the same time and learning how to sustain ourselves in case we didn't have any supplies to build a shelter. Thank you for joining us in today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. Definitely check out easyprepping.com. Play around with the calculator. It is fun to kind of see what you come up with for your family as far as what you would need in case of an emergency situation. You can also head over to morningchores.com. There's so much information over there about gardening, animal husbandry, beekeeping, you name it, it's over there. But it's a great way to build up your skill sets in the event that you would need to use them in case of an emergency. Our next video, we will be covering the categories of fire, first aid, light, and security. So it should be an interesting video, and I'm looking forward to sharing the information with you. So until then, we'll see you on the next one.